The human cost of war. During the 1971 Indo-Pak War, the atrocities committed by the Pakistan Army, led by Lieutenant General Tikka Khan in East Pakistan, had reached a horrifying peak, spiraling into outright genocide. The brutal campaign drove millions of Bangladeshis, then East Pakistanis, from their homeland, their beloved Shonar Bangla, forcing them to flee to India in desperate search of safety. Refugee camps spread widely across the country, each one a grim testament to their suffering and the perilous journey they had endured to get there. The state of the refugees was, at best, abysmal. Most had little more than the clothes on their backs, torn and bloodied, symbols of the brutality and shame they had faced. The bruises and cuts covering their bodies were a result of torture inflicted by Tikka Khan's soldiers or from grueling, barefoot treks made through now hostile motherland. Families stumbled on, carrying infants in their arms and trying to herd young children along by hand. They clutched at the last remnants of their former lives, carrying their few belongings to uncertain safe zones. The so-called safe zones were unknown to the fleeing families. Women, children, old and immobile elders had to fend for themselves as the men were occupied fighting as Mukti Bahini, local army against Tikka Khan's plundering marauders. Once inside the aircraft, they felt some emotional respite, a brief reprieve from the unimaginable. They had reached Indian soil and could sense some measure of safety. Cabin crew had given strict orders: no crying, no moaning, lest it disturbs the focus of the flight crew, though occasional whimpers from young children broke the silence. Once the planes landed at Borjar, Guwahati airfield, refugees were ushered into distribution center and swiftly loaded into army trucks to nearby temporary transit camps. There, they finally received a semblance of relief: medical aid, food and water, just enough to fortify them for the onward journey to regular refugee camps, where they would have to wait and somehow rebuild lives once again. For many, the journey was far from over, but they had found safety from the marauders of Tikka Khan, and perhaps a glimmer of hope for some and celebration of great hope for some. It remains one of the most indelible experiences of my life, a front row view into the pitiless depths of human misery, where tragedy did not stem from war, but from an insatiable lust for power, enforced by ruthless means. This was no act of nature, but rather a deliberate, man-made holocaust. No matter how hard one might strive to set such memories aside, they remain, haunting, branded into the mind. Exposure to such human-inflicted atrocities shapes a person, leaves a stubborn mark on the psyche, both personal and national. Such encounters bring an almost painful empathy, a feeling in one's bones that synchronizes with great transformations of history. One reminded of the lives of Lord Buddha, Emperor Ashoka, who, faced with the horrors of human suffering, turned to paths of peace and enlightenment. India's cause in Bangladesh was clear: freedom, peace, and a future unbound by oppression. Ours was a war not for conquest, but to deliverance of freedom to a new nation. The operation in Bangladesh had begun, and the eastern sector was declared in a state of emergency. Our days were filled with frantic sorties for evacuating refugees and the desperate effort to save lives. For 3-4 days running, I managed to keep 8 aircraft in continuous rotation, with 2 standing ready for takeoff and another pair receiving minor maintenance in the hangar. It was an achievement that exceeded even our own expectations, and I was commended by senior officers and colleagues alike. In fact, some of my fellow officers later admitted, albeit grudgingly, with a trace of reluctance, that our station commander Mankotia had pointed to my efforts as an example to follow. The commander even recommended me for the Vishisht Seva medal, though it was not to be. But does that really matter? I have always thought, even now, that there is no greater award than knowing in the depths of your inner self, with indelible knowledge, that you have done all you could, made your contribution to the honor and triumph of your nation. Refugee evacuation by USAF. The refugee evacuation efforts saw the United States send a detachment of 4 C-4 aircrafts to Guwahati. Supporting their operations, a sturdy C-130 Globetrotter provided logistical reinforcement. These C-4s were unlike anything we had encountered before. They operated on a reverse propulsion, allowing the pilots to back them up straight from the cockpit like a car in reverse gear, a maneuver now standard on modern aircraft but completely foreign to us at that time. Our Caribou, by contrast, had to be manually towed backwards with a tractor. Watching the C-4 reverse under its own power left us gaping in silent awe. Let me share another one involving the Globetrotter. As mentioned, C-130 Globetrotter provides logistical support to the detachment. True to its name, the C-130 Globetrotter would fly nearly halfway around the world, fueled by its massive internal tanks. Starting from its home base in the United States, it carried supplies destined for various detachments scattered across the globe. At each stop, it dropped off fresh supplies and picked up used or obsolete stores, making an elaborate supply chain come to life. Manila, with its expansive American military base, marked its easternmost stop. Refueled and reloaded, the Globetrotter would then begin its long journey back across the Pacific, carrying its essentials for survival and support for detachments along its route, a symbol of power and logistics unparalleled in that era. Distilling plant for washing. One day, a C-130 Globetrotter touched down, and as the technical coordinator for the US detachment, I had access to the aircraft. It was monstrous in size, with a rear hatch that swung open for loading and unloading with a military efficiency that was a spectacle in itself. I stood there, watching crates and containers slide down in swift succession. The interior of that plane was vast, like an indoor football field. I was very impressed by the modular system for loading and unloading operations. It spoke of a method honed over countless missions. One crate in particular caught my attention, large, cumbersome, and labeled with obscure codes. Curiosity getting the better of me, I asked an American technician about its contents. "A water distilling plant," he said, with a barely concealed smile. Offering what I thought was an act of Indian hospitality, I suggested they needn't go through the trouble. We had distilling unit of our own in the base, used for topping up battery water in vehicles, and it could easily meet their needs, given they had few vehicles of their own. The engineer's smile turned into a smirk. With a tone of polite restraint, he clarified that the distilling plant wasn't for vehicle maintenance. It was exclusively for hand washing. It was only later, at a social gathering, that one of my biochemists elaborated, explaining the unique array of bacteria found in the local water. The Americans, with their unaccustomed constitutions, had already suffered several bouts of gastric distress, proving their analysis accurate. Ironically, we who had grown up with these microbes got accustomed initially, but paid the price over the years in more ways than one. Premature graying, kidney issues, and various other ailments that crept up in later life. But we are alive and kicking in proud motherland Bharat. What more one asked for? The Americans were a fascinating bunch, and among them was an economist with a knack for financial insight that was both impressive and revealing. To show our hospitality, the station had arranged a cultural program featuring Assamese artists. The Bihu dancers and singers, resplendent in traditional attire, charmed the Americans with their skill and grace. By the end of the performance, the visitors, captivated by the vibrant spectacle of colorfully attired young men and women swirling in intricate movements, were thoroughly swept away by the dances and a glimpse of India's rich cultural heritage. The US detachment stayed only for a few days before packing up their mission. Not long after, Soviet assistance arrived, placing a detachment at Calcutta to aid in the refugee evacuation efforts. Meanwhile, the United States, in a show of force meant to rattle India, positioned its formidable 7th Fleet in the Bay of Bengal, backing Pakistan. But Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, resolute with an unflinching sense of purpose, countered it with a diplomatic masterstroke. Her deft political maneuvering and unswerving resolve forced the mighty Seventh Fleet to remain beyond India's maritime boundaries. No rattle, no battle, simple return like grazed cattle. It was the combined strength of Mrs. Gandhi's political acumen and the military leadership of General Sam Manekshaw and Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal that culminated in one of India's proudest moments. The Pakistani army, some 94,000 troops, under the command of Lieutenant General A.A.K. Niazi, capitulated in East Pakistan. On December 16, 1971, Lieutenant General Niazi formally signed the surrender document, handing it to Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora, commander of Indian and Bangladesh forces in the Eastern Theatre. The memory of that historic moment is etched permanently in my mind, as I am certain it is in the hearts of every Indian who lived through those times. It was the first and only major surrender witnessed since the end of World War II. The long struggle had finally culminated in the birth of a free Bangladesh. The erstwhile East Pakistan had now transformed into a liberated Shonar Bangla. I would now like to read the instrument of surrender that the Pakistani army had given to India. The Pakistan Eastern Command agreed to surrender all Pakistan armed forces in Bangladesh to Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora, General Officer Commanding-in-Chief of the Indian and Bangladesh forces in the Eastern Theatre. This surrender includes all Pakistan land, air and naval forces and also all paramilitary forces and civil armed forces. These forces will lay down their arms and surrender at the places where they are currently located to the nearest regular troops under the command of Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora. The Pakistan Eastern Command shall come under orders of Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora as soon as this instrument has been signed. Disobedience of orders will be regarded as a breach of the surrender terms and will be dealt with in accordance with the accepted laws and usages of war. The decision of Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora will be final should any doubt arise as to the meaning or interpretation of the surrender terms. Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora gives a solemn assurance that personnel who surrender shall be treated with dignity and respect that soldiers are entitled to in accordance with provisions of the Geneva Convention and guarantees the safety and well-being of all Pakistan military and paramilitary forces who surrenders. Protection will be provided to foreign nationals, ethnic minorities and personnel of West Pakistan origin by the forces under the command of Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora. It was signed jointly by Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora, General Officer Commanding-in-Chief, India and Bangladesh Forces in the Eastern Theatre, and A.A.K. Niazi, Amir Abdullah Khan Niazi, Lieutenant General, Martial Law Administrator, Zone B and Commander, Eastern Command, Pakistan, signed on the 16th of December 1971. Camaraderie on personal front. I recall those days fondly. Most around me were bachelors like Raji or Rajinder, a spirited young officer who later entered politics and was known to the world as Rajesh Pilot. Raji, then an adjutant, managed squadron security and discipline with a firm hand. Most of the personnel were from my sections, DSS and R&S. We clashed often over assignments and administrative issues, yet in the mess we were comrades, sometimes kicking around a football on weekends, tensions from the day forgotten. After Raji married and transitioned to politics, our bond only grew stronger. He rose to become a respected Minister of State, winning admiration across party lines, but he remained the Raji I had always known. I never asked him for favors, nor treated our friendship as a badge, a fact he valued deeply. Tragically, the nation lost him to a road accident, but the legacy he left behind of camaraderie, service and integrity remains as indelible as those days spent together in Guwahati. We had a gang of 6 officers playing bridge, mostly on weekends, which invariably ended up usual fierce verbal analysis. Flight Lieutenant D.S. Kohli used to be my partner generally. Teams from Narangi Army Base and some tea planters used to visit us, and we paid return visits for friendly matches. Later, Kohli was selected ADC to President of India. He invited me a number of times for Round Bridge and a visit of the famous President's Gardens. I could not avail, only to regret to date.